Old Swanner here. Today, in the second in my series on finger independence for guitar, we'll be taking a look at chromatic octaves, in which we take pairs of notes and run them up the chromatic scale one semitone at a time and then back down again. Allow me to demonstrate. Whereas the example I used in the first episode of this series, what I call the basic spider pattern, is reasonably simple. It's not going to take you long to get it into your head, and you should be able to extract quite a lot of speed from that in a very short amount of time. This example is far more geared towards strength, independence, and together they give you control in your left hand. My guess is it's going to be a lot slower than something like the basic spider. That would be even worse if you try and do the whole thing as your starting point. What we'll look at today are some ways of breaking this exceptionally complex pattern down into building blocks, which you can then address individually, see where your problems lie far more clearly, and eventually put the building blocks together to make the full sequence. Of course, as ever, I'll recommend that you measure the speed you can do the building blocks at, and my guess is that when you've got the building blocks all functional, you can then put them together, and the speed you can do the whole at is probably in the same sort of area as the speed you can do the weakest of the building blocks. The full pattern I just demonstrated falls nicely into 4 individual building blocks, the first of which looks like this. So what I'm doing is playing 2 E's on the open E string and string 4 held down at fret 2. We then bring each of those notes up 1 fret, giving us 2 F's at frets 1 and 3 of strings E and D. Then 2 F sharps on the same 2 strings, 2 G's, but this time using the open G string along with the 3rd finger on the bottom string. Finally 2 G sharps on strings 6 and 3. With fingers 4 and 1, then back to the 2 G's, the 2 F sharps, 2 F's, and where we began on the 2 E's. So the possibly hidden skill is really the same as I've talked about in my video, What They Never Told You About Chord Changes. It's all about preparation in the left hand. While I'm playing each pair of notes, for example, while I play the 2 E's to begin, I'm preparing the next 2 notes, which will be the 2 F's. So as I play the E's, you can see my fingers 1 and 3 prepare for the 2 F's. As I play the 2 F's, I will prepare fingers 2 and 4 for the 2 F sharps. As I play the 2 F sharps, I'll prepare the G on the bottom string to twin with the open G string. Finger 3 now in position for the G. Here come the G's, and I'll prepare the 2 G sharps with fingers 1 and 4. As I drop 1 and 4 on, I can lift off 3 but leave it hanging around for returning to the G. 2 G's again, prepare the F sharps, 2 F sharps, prepare the F's, 2 F's, prepare the E, and back to where we started. Now, trying to execute this as perfectly as possible will likely push your muscles a little bit harder than they've been used to, possibly the brain as well. All sorts of benefits in very slow practice on this and checking out that what your hand's doing is what you want it to do. If you execute your practice correctly, it's likely your speed goes up, so monitoring your speed as ever, absolutely crucial to knowing whether what you're doing is working. Although I've just demonstrated what I call the building block, we could view that building block as being made up of many smaller building blocks as well. In other words, we can chop even that problem smaller. Here's an example. We take the first 4 pairs of notes from the previous building block I demonstrated to make a smaller building block. And then we could chop that smaller, ideally to zoom in on the problems in there. My expectation would be that the toughest movement in there is moving from the 2 F notes to the 2 F sharp notes. So we could pull that out and just practice backwards and forwards between the 2 pairs. But we could break that down even smaller. For example, looking at the micro mechanics that make up those 2 pairs of notes. I'll bring my right hand in so you can see what I mean. So there's our first pair of notes, the 2 Fs. The perfect mechanics to get to the 2 F sharps is that my right hand fingers would touch the strings as fingers 2 and 4 land, and at this point I have 4 fingers on the fretboard. As I pluck the 2 F sharp notes, I'll lift off the 2 Fs. And to go backwards perfectly, it would be the same thing. As I bring fingers 1 and 3 to the strings, my right hand fingers come to touch the strings at the same time, and I end up again with 4 fingers on the fretboard, but this time I'll lift off the 2 F sharp notes. So the pattern becomes touch, pluck, touch, pluck, touch, pluck, touch, pluck, touch, pluck. And this way we get a perfect changeover. One tendency on some of these more awkward movements is for people to do something like this. To lift off one pair of notes before the next are ready to be played. Now this gives you a gap between the notes. It may make it easier to get between them, but it's costing you sound and it's probably not what you're after. So this idea that when we're changing, there's always a changeover point where you have all 4 fingers on the fretboard, and that would be as the right hand fingers come through the strings to pluck. As the sound is made, we lift off the previous 2 notes. And slowing it right down again. And I would expect even something like that to be pretty tricky for anyone who's never tried it before. Massive benefit in chopping it down to that sort of level and really understanding the mechanics of, number one, your left hand, but also how the right hand twins with that. So I mentioned 4 building blocks in total. We've seen the first one. The second one would begin on the highest note of the first one, which was the G sharp pairing. We'll then go to A, B flat, B, C, and back down. And so on. The third pattern would begin on the highest note of that pairing, which were the 2 Cs. And we'll go C, D flat, D using an open D string, 2 E flats, up to E using the top string open, and back down. I've forgotten this pattern. And the fourth one would begin on the highest note of that, which was the 2 E's. Going to F, F sharp, G, using an open G string, 2 G sharps, and back down. When you can do all 4 building blocks, you put them together and you've got the whole sequence from the low E to the high G sharp. And back down again. Not easy, but definitely achievable and reasonably quickly if you approach it as suggested here. As ever, I've put some tabs relating to the examples shown here in the free downloadable PDF on my website. You can find it through the companion blog article linked underneath this YouTube video. There's nothing magic about any of the stuff I'm showing you here. Nothing special about the patterns particularly. Every pattern will give you a slightly different challenge. But these are some pretty difficult ones. They'll slow you down to nothing to begin with. And let's say if you can only execute one of the patterns at 10 beats per minute, then when you can do it at 20, you've improved an awful lot. It's very easy to get progress on this sort of stuff when you have to start really, really slow. And you can continue to get progress for a long, long time. In fact, never giving up on the hope of getting progress is probably a good way to view them. Anyway, if you measure your progress, and you can do that on the PDF download as well, there'll be measuring boxes so you can jot down your top speeds. If those top speeds are improving, keep doing what you're doing. If not, see what you can do to it. Exercise the muscles harder. Exercise your brain harder. There's always a way. Best of luck.